Hello, so I thought I would do a little recording about my Saturn return, some reflections on my Saturn return, which has ended now. It's been over for a few months, but I felt like this was kind of a good time to talk about some of the themes that came up for me during my Saturn return and kind of maybe some of the things that were challenges or some of the things that were positive, and it might give some insight into what it's like to have my Saturn sign as well. So I have Saturn in Aquarius at 5 degrees and in the 11th house. Now, occasionally I do doubt my own birth time and my ascendant and my houses, but Saturn in the 11th house in Aquarius does make sense to me. And I was given an official birth time. Um, I specifically seeked it out, so it should be correct. It's just that sometimes I doubt it, but I mean, it's definitely in Aquarius anyway. So, my Saturn return, if we're talking about when Saturn was in Aquarius, so it would have been from uh, March 21st, 2020 to March 7th, 2023. And there was a period where it went into Capricorn again, it retrograded back into Capricorn on July 1st, 2020 until December 17th, 2020. And I'm getting this from Cafe Astrology, the Times, cafeastrology.com, to kind of help me out a bit. So, honestly, I'm not super organized with this. I did write some notes, quite a lot of notes actually, just to kind of give me some pointers as to where this recording is going to go. But honestly, I think this is going to be relatively freeform in some ways. So, uh, I think the main theme when I think about my Saturn return that happened for the past few years, it was really very Aquarian, and I was actually kind of surprised at how Aquarian it was and how 11th house of a Saturn return it was, because I wasn't expect. I mean, there's certain things that didn't happen the way that I was expecting it to. I was expecting something maybe a little bit bigger and more difficult, but honestly, it wasn't. When I look back at my life as a sort of a continuum, or as like a series of experiences, it doesn't necessarily stand out as particularly harsher than other periods of my life, or something like that, if that makes sense. But there were definitely certain themes that appeared that were very Aquarian and have to do with the 11th house. So the biggest thing really was the social life changes. So, Aquarius and the 11th house have to do with the collective and our groups and our social life, our kind of our associations, how we fit or don't fit into the world, and the kinds of people and the kinds of groups and associations and clubs that we associate with, if that makes sense. So for me, really, one of the big things, I mean, it actually sounds like a small thing, but one of the big things that jumps out for me is that during my Saturn return, I made a very clear choice about something that I was uh, kind of had in the back of my head for a while before that. So I was kind of building up to it. But then during my Saturn return, uh, and it wasn't like I was consciously trying to do it because it was my Saturn return and I knew that I had to make changes and I knew that I had to like grow and mature, but it was more like it just happened to happen during my Saturn return. But there's definitely a connection there as well. It's just that it wasn't a conscious thing to do with my Saturn return. But I made the choice to leave an online space that I had been quite active on. I had been very active on it a few years prior, and there were periods where I had already sort of taken a step back, and then during my Saturn return, I just decided to completely call it quits. And it was a kind of it felt like it was in a sudden way. Maybe to some people in the space, it was kind of sudden, but for me, it had been building up. So I think, first of all, I forgot to say what is a Saturn return. So I mean, if you're listening to this, you probably know, but a Saturn return is when Saturn returns to the place in the sky where it was when you were born, and it is associated with a time when you, well, you're about like late 20s, early 30s, and so it's kind of about a new chapter in your life, and things ending and new things beginning, and maturity, and kind of stepping up to the plate, so to speak. And I'm going to talk more on that later on as well. But for me, really, yeah, so it seemed like the social life aspect was a very clear indicator that, or the changes in my social life were a very clear indicator that maybe I was now trying to take steps to move forward in a way that aligns better with the kind of person that I am. So I think leaving the online space that I've been active on was a good choice for me, and it was definitely a representation of me realizing that, this isn't a good fit for me anymore. And as I said, it had been building up a lot, so I think it was time for me to move on, and because it took up a lot of my time as well. And so when I left, it was a release almost. It was like it gave me more time to do other things, and also um, I'm going to go into something else to do with that as well later. So talking about social life, not only did I leave that space, but also there were other people in my life that kind of, it was a time when I was constantly sort of, whether it was online or in person. Obviously, this was during COVID as well, so I wasn't able to kind of meet as many people, but there were periods where things were a bit more relaxed and I was able to kind of talk a bit more. Plus, there was the online thing, of course, that's always available. So, basically, what I'm saying is that there were a lot of times when someone kind of came into my life, and then, like, whether online or in person, and kind of just left very abruptly or quickly. And it was like this thing where I was trying to meet people or get to know new people uh, as much as I was able to at that time. But it was kind of like the people that weren't a good fit for me anymore, or that I wasn't a good fit for them, we kind of drifted. And it was very much a period of, I stopped talking to several people, whether it was their choice, my choice, or it was mutual. um, there were some people that I really liked that I wanted to talk to who kind of ghosted me, and things like that. So it felt like it was a clearing up of energies that maybe I wasn't particularly compatible with at the time, or something. Maybe if I didn't realize it at the time, it was still the case. So it's kind of like something in our energies, my energy, their energy, didn't match. And so it was like this thing where we just drifted apart. And I think that Aquarius has very much, to do with our associations, our friendships, and things like that. So it's kind of like it was it's kind of profound almost to me that my Saturn return in Aquarius had so much to do with social life, my own social life, and also the collective social stuff. Like with COVID, we weren't able to meet with people as much and things like that. So I'm going to go into that in a bit, because I want to mention also that there were actually also a couple of people when the rules were kind of, I think they were kind of more relaxed at that point, because we went through periods where they were more relaxed. And I remember, like, I went through several periods where I was able to meet people a little bit. And so I actually met two people during my COVID, sorry, during my Saturn return. Um, Not during my COVID. I was never actually ill with COVID. I mean, I probably had it at some point, but I never tested positive. I tested negative a couple of times. But um, anyway, so during my Saturn return, I meant to say, I did meet a couple of people who became good friends of mine. And there was kind of other things going on there. And one of them I'm actually not talking to right now. We're kind of not friends anymore, I guess. Again, it seems like, I mean, Saturn is in Pisces now. It has moved on from Aquarius, but we have kind of drifted apart. And so that is also like a continuation of my social life themes to do with my Saturn return, because again, this person came into my life during my Saturn return, and now they've kind of became more like in the background. We are not really meeting right now. And then I did meet another person during my Saturn return that um, I'm friends with, and it was almost one of those things where when like we met, I almost felt like uh, it almost felt familiar, like we already known each other or something like that. It was just, it seemed very easy. And there's been certain things going on there in a negative way as well, but when we first met, I felt like it was kind of familiar to me. And actually, it's interesting because my sun is conjunct my friend's south node. So that can have to do with sort of connections that feel faded or feel like there's a familiarity, almost like you've known each other in a past life or something. And that's kind of how I felt when I met this person. So I do want to talk more about COVID because I was super interested in kind of the state of the world really when it came to COVID and things like that. During the time that it was happening, I even was writing about it. I had like a COVID journal that I was writing about kind of the developments happening in the world and things like that. I kind of just left it at one point, but for quite a while I was writing this journal, and I think it's interesting because Aquarius has to do with the collective and how we fit, how we don't fit, and what's going on, like how we can reform things and like how things are changing. And I think it's interesting that, you know, the people who having their Saturn return uh, during COVID were the people that have Saturn in Aquarius. So it feels like, I mean, it was in Capricorn for a while as well, of course, but you know, it's like a lot of the people that were having their Saturn return during COVID were people with Saturn in Aquarius, and so it's kind of like Aquarius has to do with uh, the collective consciousness and raising of the consciousness, and you know, technology, and like, you know, obviously during COVID we went on online more, went on Zoom and all that. So it's interesting that like we are the people that were having their Saturn return during COVID, because it's like I didn't know what to expect from my Saturn return. So I didn't expect this kind of like virus to come and be happening during my Saturn return. Although during the end of it, it had already kind of um, uh, we were kind of almost like weaning off the the bigger parts of it, if that makes sense. Like we, here at least, we were able to stop wearing masks and things like that. So it is kind of life has moved on a little bit, right? So I just find it interesting that collectively the people that were going through this period of changes and maturity and needing to look back on their life and look at like where they're going next, step up to the plate, become more mature, having like a maybe a turnaround, having a like a coming full circle in something, that those people were experiencing this Saturn return like during during COVID. I just think that's interesting. Yeah, and I also with COVID came this thing with me that I talked about in another video that I'm going to link somewhere. I was talking about Saturn and Aquarius, and I was talking about a little bit about COVID and that as well, and about how I personally sort of became more socially aware during my Saturn return, partly because of COVID. And so it was kind of like COVID was the thing that inspired me to become more interested in like what is actually going on in collectively. I was becoming more interested, certainly not as much as a lot of people are. Like I don't read news as much as some people do, although I was reading more at that time. But I think definitely compared to the past me when I was younger, I was definitely reading news more, and I was just becoming more interested in what is going on collectively, what the world is. Like I was becoming more interested in these kinds of looking at what is going on outside of my own circle, outside of my own life, looking at the bigger picture, looking at um, just the patterns of the future possibilities and things like that. Just being more interested in what is happening collectively on the planet. And I've never been able to kind of go as deep into it as some people are, because I think there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of chaos, and so it's hard to find what is real and what is to be believed. but certainly I was becoming more interested during my Saturn return in like where, in terms of like what is going on in the world, and also my own role in it, and thinking about my own place in the world, and how I fit, how I don't fit. Like for example, when I left that online space, I felt like I didn't fit there anymore. Um, and also trying to embrace my own uniqueness. Aquarius has to do with our own uniqueness as well, and how we um, manage to fit that into the world, into the collective consciousness. So I was also, those kinds of topics were coming up a lot. There's kind of this thing of like almost self acceptance, a little bit more awareness around sort of ways to accept myself, and my own quirks, my own uniqueness. And I'm still not all the way there. And it's interesting actually that with the Saturn return, in my case at least, it was not the case that, you know, it was this thing that I went through and I'm now like completely mature, and I'm completely um, like coming out the other end a completely new person. Because I think a lot of the articles that I was reading about the Saturn return previously kind of said that this would happen, and I don't know if it's that I'm not as in touch with my own evolution, or that I just had a different kind of experience, but I never really felt that it was this huge difference in me. But I definitely do feel a little bit of a difference, because like I do feel like I'm, for example, more interested in like what's going on in the world and things like that. To a certain degree, I still have to be balanced about it. I still have to be selective about what I read and consume. But um, there are certain changes that have definitely happened. But it wasn't like this. It was not like this kind of big life altering thing, in the sense that I don't think that I became a whole new person, and there's still certain loose ends that I feel are not tied up, and I think maybe those will get tied up when I have my second Saturn return, perhaps. Um, so maybe when I have my second Saturn return, these themes will be revisited. These themes that I didn't fully complete, that I didn't manage to fully complete in my first Saturn return. But I definitely feel more balanced. Um, so let's see here. I'm looking at my notes. So like when my before my Saturn return started, uh, I felt like it was like this period before that where I was having a lot of sort of emotional issues and kind of complaining a lot, like to friends or people like that I was speaking to online. Even like I was talking about a lot about like what was going on, the way I was feeling, problems. It was like this rush of emotions and energy all the time in me. And so that was kind of before COVID, but or sorry, before my Saturn return. Sorry, I keep associating my Saturn return with COVID. Um, but so before Saturn return, it was like this thing where emotions were just like piling up all the time. Even looking back at some of my conversations, I mean, it's kind of strange to look at them, but I feel like now, kind of during maybe during the end of my Saturn return, and also now after my Saturn return, uh, I feel more balanced, because I feel like those emotions have kind of I still kind of fall into them here and there, but overall I feel like there was almost like a crash that was happening in me emotionally just before my Saturn return, or maybe in the beginnings of my Saturn return. And so it was like this crisis that had to happen emotionally, and then that kind of uh, has faded away, and I've become more aware of it, of like how to accept it or something like that. So I'm going to people a bit less about certain issues that would have talked to previously, and talked to them about previously. So does that make sense? I mean, I'm kind of mumbling my words here, but I feel like the Saturn return was like I have Moon square Saturn in my birth chart as well. So Saturn, during my Saturn return, Saturn would have been square my Moon, and that it can be like this crisis, emotional crisis that can result in emotional maturity and almost like this more stable, somber emotional state. So I feel like, I don't know how to word this, but it feels like I was having this kind of emotional upheaval, kind of to do with my moon being squared by Saturn as well. And then I kind of came out of it, and now I feel a little bit more mature emotionally to a point where like I don't need to talk about certain issues as much. I do still, but not as much. So I would say that. I don't want to go into this too much, but I also had something very sad and personal happen to me, uh, kind of right at the end of my of Saturn being in Aquarius. So, like I said, my Saturn is at 5 degrees of Aquarius, but this happened when Saturn was kind of at the tail end of Aquarius. But they say that when your Saturn return is kind of could be seen as being your Saturn return when Saturn is in the sign that it was in when you were born. So it doesn't have to be around the degree necessarily. You'll still have the same kinds of themes uh, all throughout your Saturn all throughout Saturn being in the same sign as your Saturn natally. So, I had something very sad happen in the family, and also I have another transit going on, which is Pluto square Mercury, and that's been going on for a while, and it's a continuous process still. And so I think that incident also, I don't want to call it an incident. It's not I just can't think of the word because I don't want to go too deeply into it. But something very big happened right at the tail end, and I think it does have to do also with Pluto squaring my Mercury as well. Yeah, so there's that. So I'm actually going to leave it at that because I'm going to finish up soon because I wanted this to be about 20 minutes. So I think if you're trying to understand Saturn return in Aquarius, really, from personal experience at least, I can say that it definitely has to do with social life changes and like the big picture thing of like where do I fit into the collective or where do I not fit into the collective. And so really the main kind of things that I was kind of tying up and getting rid of the baggage what had to do with my social life. And it feels like things are still being tied up. So just because Saturn is in Pisces now, it doesn't mean that like I'm not dealing with any of these issues now, because life is like a continuous series of experiences, and things are not just kind of that this thing happens and then it's just over. Sometimes it is like that, but not always. And so I think there's still certain things to do with my social life, for example, that are still being tied up and that haven't been resolved. And I don't necessarily feel like I have learned as much as I maybe hoped I would during my Saturn return about social life and things like that. It's definitely been a period of kind of more self acceptance and just kind of people leaving my life, people coming into my life. But I think that my Saturn return personally has not been the sort of Saturn return that really made me come out the other end completely new or completely like, oh, I've learned this major lesson. Like, I feel like I'm still learning these same lessons that I was learning during my Saturn return, and sometimes I bounce back into still kind of despair or like I still have these negative emotional stuff that I'm dealing with occasionally, right? Well, maybe more than occasionally, but it's like it's not. It's like I feel a little bit more somber, a little bit more, like in a good way, a little bit more balanced. But I'm still dealing with a lot of the same things that I was dealing with during the Saturn return. But it's just that they've become a more maybe background noise. Like I'm not. It doesn't feel like a crisis anymore, if that makes sense. And like I say, a lot of the things that felt like a crisis happened before my Saturn return. It was like building up to it, and I've heard that Saturn return can feel like it's building up to your Saturn return before it happens. So it's not like as soon as it entered Aquarius, that's when it started. That's when the topic started. It was kind of like even before. It was everything is like waves. It's just like building up to your Saturn return. But so it's not the case that you just only deal with these topics during your Saturn return. It's just that they might become more pronounced during your Saturn return. But I have to say, yeah, my Saturn return wasn't particularly as overwhelming or difficult as I was thinking that it might be, just because of some of the articles and some of the content that I was consuming, which maybe is not a good idea to kind of consume things that make something seem a certain way when it may not actually come out like that for you. But I think definitely there were certain themes that fit this Saturn return in Aquarius in the 11th house, such as the social life changes and um, just becoming more aware of my role, or my where I fit, where I don't fit. More aware of socially, more aware about the collective energies, and just like more interested in like what is going on with humanity and things like that. Yeah. So I actually did manage to talk about all the things that I had written in my notes, and I don't want to make this too long. So I do want to thank you for listening. And if you have any stories about your Saturn return, or you found any of this particularly interesting, do leave a comment and leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed this. And subscribe if you want to hear more content from me. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.